Okay, I'm going to give it just from my background. On June 14th, 1979, my husband and I and our 15-month-old son had visitors for lunch, a neighbor couple and their 2 sons who were 2 years old and 3 months old. Even before our friends arrived, the plane started spraying. Our house, which was formerly the office for a rock crusher, was only 60 feet from the road, and the alfalfa field was just on the other side. The plane moved over the edge of the field and over our friends as they drove up. Each pass moved further away, but continued to drift onto us, and the plane continued to turn over the house. All attempts we made to communicate with the pilot failed. We didn't know what to do. Should we close the windows? Should we open the windows? The kids weren't happy, but they were only 2 years old and younger, so they couldn't communicate. Our bees did let us know that something was wrong. We found handfuls of dead bees outside the hives, and the hives didn't survive. The plane was spraying something called supercide, an organophosphate insecticide. After many attempts to locate someone charged with pesticide regulation, we lucked out at the county attorney's office, who found a form for reporting pesticide damage to the Kansas State Board of Agriculture. The investigator took samples and told us about the pesticide. The Board of Ag took the sprayer to court over the last minute objections of the county attorney, who just found out about it. And the case resulted in a $300 fine. That's not much, but this was 42 years ago. And it was the first ever in the state. Okay, so now we're going to hear from Rob.
Hey, I'm going to try and allow my screen share to work here. So what you should be seeing now is a picture of our farm. I am located in Iowa. My name is Rob Fox. You will notice that the spelling is F-A-U-X, which some people will know as French for French faux or fake. We can't resist it, so our farm name is the Genuine Fox Farm or the Genuine Faux Farm, whichever way makes the most sense to you. Our farm is approximately 15, 16 acres in size, so we're not real huge, but we're big enough to get into trouble. And what you see in front of you is our tomato field from a couple years ago, and kind of gives you an idea of the scale of our farm. During our peak seasons, we have been able to produce 15 tons of food from this 15-acre farm in one season. That includes vegetables, fruits, eggs, and poultry. And that's a fairly significant amount of food for a fairly small amount of property. So I wanted to bring that up just to show you that small scale does not necessarily mean that it's a hobby or that this is not a serious business that we are undertaking. We have a couple of high tunnels on the farm. Both high tunnels move. So what you're seeing in the next picture is a building we've just moved off of crops we've started, and then we'll start our summer crops in that second position. Our farm is certified organic, and up until recent years, we had a 120-member community-supported agriculture program. We would sell to restaurants and schools and various other things. Now we're moving more towards seed production and larger sale amounts. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what kind of farm you're dealing with here. As I said, we're certified organic, and we grow a large number of crops. During our most ambitious season, I would say we probably grew 32 different kinds of crops in one season, and our seed list usually is somewhere in the 200 to 300 different seed types. We also have poultry. We raise turkeys, we raise chickens, we have raised ducks. So that kind of gives you a good picture so that I can set the stage for the next thing. Which would be our incident in 2012. And Terry will probably flinch because there's too many similarities here. What you see in the picture now is an airplane with the sprayers on, flying directly over the field where our turkeys are pastured at that moment. This is a picture just after the plane had taken another pass, flown directly over me and the hens. I was sprayed, and I was dampened by the droplets from this plane, and they continued to fly over our farm as they were applying 2 pesticides and a fungicide to a nearby soybean crop. They pretty much ran with the sprayer on over half of our farm, and that included one of our high tunnels, 2 of our flocks of poultry, and our most productive field that particular year, which wasn't necessarily a welcome situation. We did manage to get the clothing off my back and take care of that so we could get it tested, and it came back, of course, as a positive that I had been sprayed. But then that's not a surprise because I was standing right out in it. Here's a sample of what we lost. This is just one quick picking. One of the problems with being a vegetable producer as opposed to a row crop producer and being the victim of either drift or misapplication is that there really isn't a good formula to determine how much somebody loses when you actually get sprayed. Everything in the spray zone we realized would not end up being safe for human consumption. So that meant it was a total loss. But instead of just simply throwing the crop, we had to actually harvest the crop and get samples out of it so we could establish that we did in fact have a good crop and that crop was actually a loss. Unlike, say, if I had a soybean crop that it was certified organic and had been sprayed, then we would simply look and see if there was a yield reduction from the average, and there would also be we'd be compensated for the yield reduction and any price difference between certified organic and non-organic. But in our case, we had to spend a lot of time documenting what was lost, how much it was worth, and we had to be able to prove all that. We also ended up not allowing any of our eggs to be sold during this period. This is just a sample of some of the production over a short period. We opted not to sell eggs for 3 months after the spray period, and we had a terrible time trying to get anybody to talk to us about whether the chemicals would metabolize and whether the eggs would be safe after a period of time. We did have to move all of our poultry off of the affected pasture areas, and since we only have 15 acres, you can imagine exactly how hard that was to find locations to put those birds so they weren't on sprayed area. We were certified organic, which meant suddenly half our farm was not certified organic for 3 years. That meant we had to do a split operation, which is a little bit of a nightmare in and of itself. I did suffer some acute symptoms immediately after the spray, so I did have some illness immediately after. We don't think there were any chronic conditions that came from it. And we did pursue litigation in this case, and it took us about 2 years and 10 months before we had an out-of-court settlement that covered our expenses and losses, but didn't do anything beyond that. We were just simply, we were exhausted from the process and decided not to go to the trial in court, even though our lawyers suggested we would do well there. We were just tired. But that's not all, folks. This was a misapplication and overspray. In 2018, we had a particle drift incident. So what you see in the picture now are some cucumber leaves, and you'll see all that nice light spotting all over the leaves. In this case, what happened is we had a strong wind coming our direction, and we noted a sprayer, a ground sprayer, drive up to that field that was in the windward direction from us. And we got out there and talked to the guy and said, hey, the winds are hitting 20 miles an hour, they're coming our way, and you know we have sensitive crops. We need you to not spray. He ended up calling his supervisor, and the supervisor ended up talking to us and saying, well, we know you're there, we know it's windy, but we have to spray anyway. And so they did spray. So, of course, what happens is the very next day you have this picture. This is the day after the spraying. And this gives you a good idea of a particle drift spray pattern that you might see on leaves of any particular crop that might be affected by particle drift. That's why I wanted to share that picture with you. This is also peas that were in the same area that had the drift. If you look at the middle leaves, you can see that particle drift spotting. Once again, it wasn't there the day of the spray. It was there the day after the spray. So that's a particle drift incident in this case. I'm going to take it off the screen share and talk about a little bit more. Not only have we had to deal with particle drift, we've had to deal with vapor drift incidents as well. Some of our neighbors have taken to using dicamba-ready soybeans, and if you know anything about dicamba, it tends to volatilize if temperatures are high and if it's a spray on over the top of the plants, so you have it on the leaves of the soybeans, that can vaporize and drift. And what ends up happening is that your plants, it's a growth inhibitor. Your plants tend to not to grow through maturity. So an example from drift incidents for dicamba, we were used to harvesting peppers like you saw in that early picture, maybe 3,000 to 6,000, depending on how many we decided to plant that were marketable per year. And the last year I grew peppers in the field, I harvested 7. That is the number 7 with no zeros behind it. I had 7 marketable peppers in that season because of the inhibited growth due to dicamba. So I wanted to bring those 3 incidents up to say, hey, these are the problems we have. What I really wanted to point out is that from the perspective of the food grower, there are some key things that we need to think about. First of all, it's food safety. I am very concerned about this for food safety reasons, because if I get sprayed and I don't necessarily know that I've been sprayed and I give you the food, what's going to happen? Are you going to get sick? I don't want to make you sick. And then again, what about worker safety? I hire your children. I hire high schoolers and college-age students. So of course, if they're out in the field and somebody's spraying, what do you want me to do? You want me to pull them out of the field. And that's what I would do. And of course, we have environmental concerns. I rely heavily on pollinators, and we continue to spray with these pesticides and reduce the populations, which reduces my production, which of course, that's the 4th point. I have production concerns. I lost all the produce I had to destroy because of the drift incidents. I would not give them to people. So now I have less that I can sell and I have less income, but I'm mostly worried about your health, and my workers' health. And in the end, the worst part of it all is the burden of proof is on me, the grower, the small grower who has had somebody's chemicals cross the property line. If I want to try and do anything about this, I have to document it. I have to go through the processes to report it. And I end up having to bear most of the burden.
Thanks, Rob. We'll hear from Angela now.
Just want to remind anybody who's watching, if you have any questions, you could put it in the live discussion box and we can get to them afterwards.
I'm gonna go back. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Angela Jackson-Pulse. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. Pesticide application and drift policy reform and state pesticide enforcement is a very important topic to me, not only because I've been directly affected, but many others are being affected as well. Since my exposure, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, I've started the South Dakota Pesticide Drift Working Group, and I've testified for at least 5 state bills around pesticide application reform. We have had some good things, some good changes come out of this with our activism, but there's still been some unfortunate setbacks as well because of that. I live in Southeast South Dakota. And I own and operate a small organic farm. I've been here since 2010 in this location. I lost my organic certification in 2017. I do hope to get it back this year. And I also work off the farm, but I primarily raise chickens and poultry for eggs and meat. And I do sell to large retailers and grocery stores, as well as restaurants. We have an on-farm processing plant, and we are also certified organic. So we're not we're small in terms of acreage, but we're big in terms of volume. My husband and I experienced similar story. We were outside in 2017, and we had a plane crisscrossing across our property. We really didn't know what was going on. The plane circled around our property and livestock and neighborhood. It was flying really low overhead. We thought it was actually going to crash. You can see it coming over this is our property here. You can see in this little picture up in the corner. I tried to catch him. He was flying 100 miles an hour. So we didn't know what was going on. We just knew that he was kind of circling around, and we didn't really realize what he was doing. When he finally descended in the field across from, this is our farm here, he was spraying in this field to the south of 316th Street. We were standing at the end of the road because we thought he was going to crash because of his erratic behavior, because he was flying over the top of these 3 houses and mine's in the middle, like super, super low to the point that it was rattling the windows and shaking the dishes off the wall. So we were really wondering what he was doing. And my husband was in the processing plant, and he ran out, and he could smell the herbicide spray, and he could see it. So we conclude that he was discharging, much similar to the earlier story we heard, he was discharging, or what we call purging, his tanks over the top, priming them over the top of our homes. And he circled back around. We were at the end of our driveway, and he circled back around, came down right next to the road, and soaked me and my husband in chemicals. He opened up the booms and kept the booms open. Even as he started flying over the top of these trees here, he kept the booms open and just kept flying. We were out there for a little bit. We did filming it as he was going. We did file a complaint with the EPA. He did get fined. He got a warning for flying 300 feet above, for flying 10 feet of more than 10 feet above the crop canopy, but he had no insurance. South Dakota doesn't require any pesticide applicators to carry any liability insurance, and a lot of them, unfortunately, a few of them, I shouldn't say a lot, I don't know, but a few don't. I experienced terrible burning in my face, my eyes, mouth, and throat. The migraine set in after that, and I've had a lot of medical issues since then. Then in 2018, a similar situation happened again with a ground sprayer. Here's a picture of the dead bees. We were talking about dead bees. So there were hundreds of dead bees started dying, and insects started dying after the 2017 event, and it smelled like dead fish. Here's some of the herbicide damage. The operator said that he didn't spray herbicides that day, that it was fungicides and insecticides, but we had 2 inspectors out on our property who said that we tested positive for herbicides. And we later learned that they did not clean out the tanks between the last runs. And we had a nice cocktail of lots of different things in there that should not have been in there. And it consequently caused what we see down here in the lower right-hand corner, which was 2 things happened. We had a chemical, an inversion, and a chemical reaction happen. And we had a chemical fog hit the neighborhood. And the chemical fog drifted for hours and hours and hours. In fact, the residue levels were higher 7 days after the incident than it was 2 days after the incident, because we had multiple inspectors take samples. So because it was organic, we had an organic inspector come out and do an additional inspection and take samples and investigate. And then the state investigated, and then I also did my own investigation and took my own samples. All of them coincided with the same, the same results. Our clothing and everything tested positive. One of the things that's really heartbreaking about our story in 2018, when it happened again, was that they, again, similar situation, they sprayed, this time when they sprayed, they were spraying a Roundup Ready soybeans or Extendamax beans. And the test results came back again for things that weren't supposed to be in the tank, including aminocyclopyrachlor, which is not approved for crops. And my clothing had levels that were so high. The levels of ACP or aminocyclopyrachlor are so high in my clothes, which is the active ingredient in that product, is that it wasn't supposed to be there. So we got dinged with the EPA 2 times. Once we got reported the EPA twice, once in 2017 because the levels of fungicides were higher than the EPA allowed tolerance levels for the target crop. And then we got hit again and because ACP is not supposed to be on crops. So we lost all affected areas. We lost our certification again. But a bigger issue than that, when ACP gets on food crops, you can't sell it at all, ever. Because it's not allowed to be in the food chain. So we had to destroy everything. The gardens, all the vegetables, anything edible had to be destroyed because it's not even tested for in our food supply because it's not supposed to be applied on crops. So in that case, in 2018, the applicator got no fines, nothing. They found he did nothing wrong, even though all the test results and the clothing results and everything came back. 2018, I got sent again to the hospital, to the emergency room, and I was in the decontamination unit at Sanford Health. Major issues. You can see here some of the rashes, which I continue to struggle with. The face burns, the chemical burns on my face from the chemicals. So since then, I've been diagnosed with asthma, reactive airway disease, kidney disease, glossopharyngeal neuralgia, small fiber neuropathy, uncontrolled high blood pressure, chronic migraines, severe allergies, eczema, chronic hives. I have chronic sore throat, chronic pruritus, and I also have chronic laryngitis. I had none of these conditions prior to being exposed, and I was a very active farm worker. I helped my husband on the farm. This picture was taken right before I was exposed. Now I have a registered disability and I have a handicap placard in my car. I've been to the Mayo Clinic. I actually go there again next week. So I am seeing the Mayo Clinic doctors in Rochester for my disabilities and my injuries. And we have, besides that, our livestock also got poisoned and our dog experienced acute poisoning and died later that year. Besides the hundreds of bees that were killed, beehives over a mile away were also affected by this application of insecticides. We did end up filing a legal complaint. The law firms of Davenport, Evans, and Hurwitz and Smith and Birmingham and Schwach in South Dakota are representing us, and we're scheduled to go to trial in November 2022. Discovery is ongoing, and I am still looking, trying to find experts in the field of human medical toxicology, which are greatly needed in my case, to review the research and review the medical records to determine causation for injuries and damages. And I guess my story is I just want to come forward that pesticide drift and pesticide exposure, it can cause serious bodily harm and injury. And one of the things I'm really pushing for in South Dakota is to get liability insurance for personal injury when these accidents or these things happen, because they're just not right. I have over $100,000 in medical bills that I've accumulated and since 2017 and ongoing lifetime issues. I have to have injections and treatments that cost thousands of dollars every 6 weeks for my neuralgia. So that's my story. I'm very passionate about sharing my stories. I'm really really interested in pesticide reform and just really trying to protect the public, the general public, from aerial applicators when they shouldn't be spraying near homes and schools and things like that. So I'll just open it up for questions.
Okay, thank you. Well, actually, Jeff, we need to set up the Jeff.
all hear me?
See, there's an
Hey,
interesting
Jeff,
question.
do we have the video?
Yeah. You can hear me though. I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Terry, there's an interesting question in the chat box about how to deal with pesticide rules in right to farm counties. And if that's a problem with regulating or how that affects pesticide law and drift. I don't know if now's the time to bring it up, but I just thought I'd direct you to that question since we're waiting.
Maybe we should look at, does anybody have any ideas? Oh, wait, looks like we got the,
Sorry, I did just get this. All right. Should I wait or should I go ahead and play it?
just go, let's go.
Okay.
I appreciate the opportunity to share an issue I've been working on the last 3 years because against herbicide by camera. My camera's been used for decades in the cool season as a burn down pastures because it is highly volatile and then becomes a gas and spreads around. And it affects a wide variety of wildlife. But there's increasing weed pressure from species like poppy that have become to herbicides such as Roundup. Now farmers want new and new uses for old pesticides. Team Monsanto, now there, produces
Jeff or Terry, can you please stop for a second?
but also
We all need to mute.
Yeah, sorry. I think whoever is not muted, including even any of the speakers or moderators, it'll give feedback coming back into your microphone.
How do we mute?
Just hover over the video and click the microphone button that pops up.
Over the video?
Yeah, just hover anywhere on where the video screen is and you'll see some buttons pop up and one looks like a microphone. You just click that to mute it.
Mute. Okay. But now I can't hear.
Huh. I think maybe Jeff has muted himself too.
He muted the video. Jeff? Okay.
Real quick, Terry, do you want to take some of these questions while I do that?
Okay, let's
I think we can probably
skip
just
the
take some
video.
questions and go.
I think that's a great idea. There's some really good questions if you haven't.
Somebody want to talk about right to farm, whether that was an issue in your drift cases?
Yeah, I'm going to give you some of the questions from the chat. That first one, how to address right to farm rules in counties and how that affects pesticide regulation. Does anyone want to speak to that real quick?
Well, I can talk about it a little bit, and then if Angela wants to chime in, that would be great. part of the issue, I noticed there was a little bit of response in the chat box. Part of the issue is there's really two parts to dealing with pesticide use. Part number one kind of comes from the EPA and the development of the use labels that direct how to use a chemical in a quote unquote safe fashion. And you are required to follow the use label. And if you don't follow it, then supposedly you have broken the law. The other part is the enforcement portion, which is up to each individual state. So for example, in Iowa, where I live, we have a pesticide bureau, and they have the job of enforcing the use label. So if somebody reports that a use label was not followed and drift occurred, then they'll take samples and go through a process. The problem in Iowa in particular is our pesticide bureau is understaffed and underfunded, and the fines are so small that most people just kind of write it off as a cost of doing business. They don't really worry about the fines. I suspect in North Dakota, or South Dakota, their enforcement is even weaker, and that's part of the problem. So the right to farm thing in some ways is tied to the combination of writing the label for directions on how to apply and then enforcement. In any case, in Colorado, it would still be subject to whatever enforcement procedures are in line for the state.
Did you want to say anything to this?
Yeah, in South Dakota, there's a preemption law in South Dakota that takes away all the ability of the municipalities to take any action. We did try that approach. We actually went to the county and started with our local municipalities first, and they actually sent us to the state, and we didn't get anywhere with the idea that we had a right to farm this way. We actually had to just I wrote the chemical trespass report, which there's a link to it in this forum. That report, I made 100 copies of it and sent it to all our lawmakers and state leaders, including the Secretary of Agriculture, and demanded a meeting with him immediately. And that did work. I was invited to peer, and I did meet with them more than once. And I found that we got movement that way. But there really was, we didn't get any other help or any other, support. We found actually later on that there's, for specialty producers and organic producers in South Dakota, there's a lot of animosity towards us. And so as a result, it's been very difficult and challenging.
So I'd like to ask a question that's kind of referred to in here. We at Beyond Pesticides are always pointing to organic production as being the solution for the problems of pesticide, all the problems. I'd like to hear from you about what the challenges are for organic farmers in dealing with, in being that solution that we all want organic to be.
Okay, in South Dakota, I'm actually fighting for the right to farm organic. Our state legislature has actually condemned organic in public hearings and basically said that organic farming is just nothing but is fake, and it's not real, and it's just, they don't take it seriously. And we've actually been attacked viciously in public testimony, which is really sad. I've actually think that, and I've been encouraging large organic organizations who produce or buy crops from organic farmers in South Dakota to rally behind us and go to some of these hearings and let our state legislators know that organic farming is viable. It pays the bills. It's provides so many benefits to our community and for pollinator habitat. It's so important. But we have tried. We're moving the needle a little bit, but it's very challenging because when I go to peer and testify with my husband, we have people that say, oh, well, we're going to come testify. And then they get, scared or whatever. They don't come. there's a lot of reasons why people don't like to go up in front of public and do public testimony, especially when it's recorded forever, I guess. And so we've had difficulty getting other organic farmers to rally and go to peer and testify in support of some of these reforms that actually help organic farmers.
Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just organic farming, it's skilled farming. It's the whole idea that farming is a skilled occupation. There are folks who maybe are not certified organic that are fine farmers, and they're row croppers, and they want to do things. They want to have 5-year rotations, and they want to use cover crops, or they want to have turnaround zones or buffer zones. They want to have pollinator strips, and still end up doing what they need to do to put food on the table for their family. I mean, that's the common denominator. And the point is we've been able to do this in the past, and we seem to have gotten enamored with one single type of tool, and that's the chemical tool. And there are so many more ways and so many more tools in our toolboxes to be skilled farmers. It just so happens that certified organic farms, whether they're row cropping or they're poultry or whatever, it just so happens certified organic farms try to encourage the use of a broader set of tools and be skilled farmers. And I find it discouraging that we seem to think that being good at doing something is a problem.
And can you explain to people who might not know it about how buffer zones work for organic farmers?
Yeah. So our farm, as I mentioned, is only 15 acres. So we're not huge, but we do produce plenty of food. To be certified organic, you are required, depending on your certifying agency, I'm required to have a 30-foot buffer zone around all of my property so that any encroachment from another field supposedly could land in that 30-foot buffer zone. You and I and everybody else here realizes 30 feet is probably not going to stop a 20-mile-an-hour wind application coming my way. So what we have done in addition to that is we've incorporated vertical buffer zones where we put in bushes and trees and various other barriers in an effort to try and halt drift when application is happening on a day that actually meets use label recommendations. So at least in that case, I'm doing mitigation to prevent drift when they're at least following the use label. But I cannot protect myself with 30 feet and a vertical buffer zone if people turn on the nozzles as they fly over my farm or whatever. The downside here is the row croppers who are using chemicals are not required to have a buffer zone. So they can go right up to the fence row and right up to the border if they so desire. And that's part of the problem. And the reality is they might find it to their benefit to have turnaround areas where there's grass, to have buffer zones and fence lines and pollinator strips. All those things could be beneficial to them as well. But apparently that is not in their playbook right now.
Did you want to add anything, Angela?
Yes, we also have, as you saw in the picture I shared earlier, we have trees all around our property with vertical, so we have vertical buffers as well as 80 to 100 foot buffer strips. Our drift, they started taking, I think they stopped taking samples at 700 or 800 feet into our property. It was still testing positive. So if the wind is going in the wrong direction or an inversion happens, and especially an inversion, it's over. I mean, I don't care how many, I mean, it can drift up to 2 miles. So.
Yeah. So one of the things that I concluded after, dealing with the drift incident that we dealt with more than 40 years ago was that there's no way that I could protect myself without protecting everybody. And that's what led me to Beyond Pesticides, which was at that time because pesticides is only 40 years old. And so I guess the you know, the title of this workshop is Fighting Chemical Trespass. And so I wondered whether you ideas for how we can be successful in fighting chemical trespass in a larger scale. We didn't get to watch Dan's video, but he was documenting the vapor drift far from where it was actually being applied. And I'm sure the two of you know how far that. I have 100 acres in Missouri, and in the middle of that, you can see the cupped leaves from the dicamba. So, Angela, you want to start? You have some ideas about what kinds of changes we could make?
I think that, as I was mentioning earlier, this chemical trespass report that I put together, and then just the fact that I'm getting in front of our lawmakers on a regular basis, actually flew and met with the EPA in person in Denver in Region 8, because our situation, my health situation is quite serious. And what happened to us was very serious. We had EPA violations happening here that needed to be investigated. And I demanded a meeting with the EPA. And so I went and met with them, and I shared, and I openly showed them I had 30 violations to the FIFRA cooperative agreement by themselves, not including everything else was going wrong. Now, I'm not going to go into all the issues I had with the state of South Dakota's pesticide program, but I will tell you I filed a malfeasance complaint against them with the EPA for a reason. Their investigation and enforcement practices are not consistent. So I think that people need to get in their write their lawmakers, continue to push for reform, get in front of your local leaders, your state leaders, your FIFRA cooperative coordinator, whoever that is for your state. Meet with them regularly, talk to them. And then, like we did in South Dakota, we formed a pesticide drift action group, working group, to get everybody at the table to discuss what real change can look like. We've made baby steps, but not as much as I'd like to see.
And before I switch to Rob, what does real change look like?
For me, real change looks at people respecting other people's property boundaries. You don't have a right to put your chemicals or your fire, onto my property because and I don't put my farming practices on your side of the fence. You shouldn't put them on my side of the fence. So let's just respect each other's boundaries, and let's be friendly and just try to. That's what I'm working. That's what I'm working toward. I was able to achieve that finally with the neighbor to my south. He did voluntarily put in a buffer strip, but it took a lot of work and a lawsuit to make that happen. But it takes work. Persistence pays off.
Rob, do you have some ideas?
Part of the idea is, Angela and I both did this at varying degrees. Part of the reason my wife and I decided to take our case from the initial spray to litigation wasn't so much that we were going to survive as a farm because we have a resilient farm and we're fairly good at what we do. That's great. We were going to take a hit and lose money that year, but we were going to continue. Going through the litigation process was awful. And I think Angela will agree. It's not fun. It's mild. It's rather painful, in fact. But we did that partly because we realized there are an awful lot of people out there that get drifted on, get sprayed on, they get bullied, they give up because it's hard. The current process is difficult if you want to have something change, or if you want to go through the process and say, hey, these people did the wrong thing, something needs to happen. It's hard. We went through the process in part because we realized if we didn't stand up, then we would simply fall right into the same trap that everybody else is falling into, that gives up and allows themselves to be bullied. And I know that doesn't sound nice, because if you're being bullied, it's really hard to get yourself out from underneath that. I get that. We were in a position where we were feeling strong enough to do it, and that's why we pushed hard. What we need is we need people to be standing up, and we need people to be standing together. Just like the group that Angela's talking about in South Dakota, we have a public working group that's starting up in Iowa. We need to do more of this, and we need to start changing the narrative. We need to get the word out there. I mean, right now, I think we're talking largely amongst ourselves, and we need to be talking to people who aren't willing to come to a Beyond Pesticides National Forum. We need to get more people involved in this, and I think we're going to find that things can change as we change the narrative.
So do you think the litigation, I don't know, you know, people successful with the litigation, successful in the sense of receiving enough, having the spray that it's actually an incentive not to do that the next time?
I can actually respond to that with our personal experience. As I said, it was the compensation was too late, but it did cover our losses. Okay, so it was a quote unquote fair settlement. It did not do anything to cover any of my health damage that occurred immediately after, nor did it do anything to really punish them for not doing what they needed to do, but it did cover our losses. And I will tell you that we started getting more phone calls from people in the vicinity who wanted to do an aerial spray or a ground spray in the following year and a half to 2 years afterwards. They were more concerned because we hit somebody in the pocketbook. And by the same token, when we had the particle drift situation and that we confronted the sprayer and they sprayed anyway, the next year, the landowner hired somebody who had a specialist spraying outfit that was extremely careful with the time, with the place, with the droplet size, everything. And when I talked to the guy before he sprayed, he said, people are forgetting that these are dangerous. He said, all these people running around and spraying with the cloud behind their rigs are not applying things correctly. So if you see a cloud behind the rig, this was a professional applicator, and he said, they're not doing it right. So in answer to your question, the litigation did make some difference, but then people have short memories.
Okay. Angela, I guess you're in the middle of litigation, but I wondered how hopeful you are about this.
I'm very hopeful because I'm in this for the long haul, and I knew that going in. And because I have life-changing disabilities now, I am not backing down. And now I fully understand the dangers of pesticides, like vapors and drift can be just as dangerous. And because I live with a disability now every day of my life, there's no amount of money that can compensate me for what's happened. I've lost my ability to speak normally, my ability to live normally. I can't farm. I can't do anything. I can't go outside. I live with an air purifier by my side 24 hours a day because any kind of irritant that I breathe sends me into a severe reaction. So I have to live in a bubble. And there's no, am I going to get what it's worth? No. But I want something. Maybe I'll get something to help me with pay my long-term medical bills, or something, to help my family has suffered along with me hugely.
So one person asked here or says that the part of the issue is that impact to public health, the pesticide drift incidents are investigated by a state. Is that your experience?
This is a very long conversation that gets me very emotional, but correct. The state of South Dakota does not enforce or do anything about personal injury. There's actually the personal injury report. A copy of it is in the chemical trespass report for everyone to see. They did nothing. The report's conclusive. If you read the report, the human exposure was conclusive. And the operator, they did nothing to the operator for applying in conditions that would endanger public health.
Rob, What's your experience?
Right now, the system is not built to deal with health. Period. We don't need to say anything more. The system has nothing to do with that. If you want to do anything about health, then it is left up to you and I, the people who have been drifted on, who have been sprayed, to do whatever it is we can do. And we're left to our own devices because there are no governmental agencies right now that step up to protect us in this regard. So it's left to us to make our organizations, make our groups, and do our own things that we need to do. Otherwise, there are no mechanisms that I'm aware of other than we're left to our own devices.
And Terry, I'd like to just comment on that. That is true.
Sure.
In the state of South Dakota, the damaged parties are, and I see there's some comments about this in the chat. I want to address this. In South Dakota, the victims are the ones that's responsible for leading the investigation and doing all the work. The state of South Dakota has been clear that their investigation reports and results and their testing is not meant to be used in civil court cases. It's meant to be proved that there's been an EPA label violation. So victims have to hire, or usually are encouraged in this case, to hire their own investigator to come out to their property and do their own investigation, take their own samples, and do their own work. The state of South Dakota has also indicated that they're short on resources, which has affected them being able to do enforcement to the level in which they would like to.
In our case, we actually had to do the legal research as well. We hired what others called a white hat attorney, but he didn't do the work. And so we ended up doing the legal research as well. There's a couple people who have asked in the researchers can do for you. And do you guys have any?
I do. I actually inviting researchers to join our team and our litigation, especially anybody who's doing research is listening to this, that's doing research on pesticide toxicology and public health and the impact to human health. Mayo Clinic is very interested in the injuries that happened to me. They don't know how it happened, but they have linked my injuries, to the pesticide exposure. And we're looking for researchers to review my medical records and to review the research we've done and look at this, because it does need to be looked at. It's a public health issue.
So this is not just research in general. You're somebody, experts who can be expert witnesses for you.
Expert witnesses, yeah. And I am working on a book, and I am looking for researchers who would like to collaborate with me on that project, and just extend the research, the 10,000 pages of research that we've already done. I would like to take, to get that into the hands of the general public, and just, I think it's important. It's a public health issue.
Rob?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, we do need people who could be expert witnesses, but also let's take a look at the case real quick of tobacco, for example. It took us a long time and lots of studies that were very specific looking into the health risks of tobacco. We need to do some of the same things if we want to actually get this turned around. We need to have very specific studies that show the specific risks, the specific damages, the specific problems that come with these pesticides, including proving and showing that these things do drift and how much they drift and how far they drift. We have some of that research, but let's just realize the reality here that it's going to take lots of this research to show our point before we can get that needle to move. So there needs to be an awful lot of work done. For example, I could find no research done on whether pesticides in chickens would eventually metabolize in their system and their eggs would be safe. Or, if we were raising turkeys for food, is it okay to go ahead and process them after they've been in a spray incident later on? I don't think there's anything that studied those things specifically. And if we have no specific answers, what do? We're kind of lost. I realize the problem is that researchers need funding, and there's an awful lot of funding going to other research about how can we get a new chemical to kill more insects or kill more weeds. But there's not a whole lot of effort spent into making sure that all those things are perfectly safe.
And Rob,
I'm sorry, I just want to interrupt real quick. We only have about 2 minutes left before the feed's going to cut out. So just wanted to make sure.
Okay. Thank you. Go on, Angela.
I just have a 30-second comment building on what you said, Rob. We talked to Bayer Monsanto about the aminocyclopyrachlor mixed with glyphosate and how that could have happened. And nobody is researching what happens when you mix all of these different products together in a tank mix. We asked them that, and they're like, we talked to the researchers at universities, and they're saying nobody's testing all of these different things that they're mixing together in these proprietary blends that's happening at the applicator level. Nobody's testing what happens to those when you mix them together. And there's unintended consequences when you don't rinse the tank out. And that's more research need there.
Quickly, before we break, if people have expert witnesses to suggest to you, how would you like them to get in touch with you?
They can email me directly at Angela@prairiesunorganics.com. I think my email address is also on the chemical trespass report, but I would welcome anybody who could refer an expert witness to us in the area of pesticide toxicology.
Did you, Rob, did you have any requests that way?
At this moment, no. I just would like more people who are in science to be willing to stand up. I realize that when you're trained as a scientist, sometimes you're trained that you're supposed to do your science and keep your head down. You're not supposed to be an activist as well. But scientists have all kinds of knowledge that would be very beneficial in trying to make changes to this world that would be for the better.
Correct. And just having
Thank
scientists who are also willing to stand up in trials with what they know.
Yes. Okay, thank you. We have another session coming up, and meanwhile, we have a